Hello and welcome to Focus 54, the real feel of Africa. My name is Jeffrey Murimbechi, and every single week we take you across the issues that are really focused on Africa. We'll be having a big insight and digging deep into Africa Climate Change Week and the Africa Climate Change Summit. We have three guests that will be joining us in the second and third segment to give us more insight on what exactly climate change is, how it's affecting Africa, what we can do as Zimbabwe, and where the entire continent is going. But before we get into that, we get straight into our African news, starting off with Kenya, where a landmark climate change summit ended on Wednesday after leaders adopted a declaration, which is dubbed the Nairobi Declaration, that will see the continent potentially going green. Now, speaking of our neighbors, Zambia is one of the greatest and the largest copper producers in the world. But Zambia's government has handed a landmark troubled copper mine to its original owners, Vendata Resources. Konkola Copper Mine, which is called the KCM, has placed under liquidation in 2019 after former President Edgar Lungu accused it of failing to meet obligations. Now, the current Minister of Mines, Minister Paul Kabuswe, has said that Vendetta is back, and the company has committed to investing 1 billion United States dollars to develop this mine. We go all the way to the north of Africa, in Egypt, where a building collapse on Wednesday killed 4 Egyptians on the same from the same family in a Cairo neighborhood, where similar tragedy occurred this summer, as reported by state media. 5 people were injured after the 4-story building fell in the street and the working class district of Hadek al-Kaba district, and the state-run Daily has reported on this. These are some of the issues that are being reported across Africa. And to find out more, do go onto our Facebook page and our website, www.zbcnews.co.zw and ZBC News Online for regular updates of what's happening in Africa. But stay tuned. The second segment is coming through, and we'll dig deep into the Africa Climate Change Week and Africa Climate Change Summit.
Unearthing the hidden. In-depth analysis. 24 investigates, shines the light in the dark corners affecting our society. We go in-depth to tell the complete story. 24 investigates, dedicated to promoting accurate, factual and accountable news reportage. Nothing remains concealed forever.
Welcome back to Focus 54, the second segment, where I've got my resident experts who will be breaking down the Africa Climate Change Week as well as the Africa Climate Change Summit. And I am joined in studio from the Climate Change Network of Zimbabwe by Miss Melissa Murirwa, as well as Onward Marumani, who is an agribusiness consultant who deals directly with climate change related matters. And later on in the third segment, I have my third expert who will be breaking down this very complex thing that is now affecting Africa. Lady and gent, welcome to I was about to call it Climate 54. Welcome to Africa 54. Let's just get straight into it. Starting with you, Melissa. How significant is the Africa Climate Change Summit as well as Africa Climate Change Week in Africa?
Okay, thank you. I can say it is of great importance because it brings together the leaders, heads of states, policymakers, the marginalized groups, the vulnerables, and also the youth to come together and discuss the policies and a way forward for Africa. Now that we are towards COP28, that is the Conference of Parties, that will be happening in UAE in December, we have to have one position as Africa. So taking into consideration this platform, the Africa Climate Week and Africa Climate Summit, it brings together everyone who is within Africa to come and air out their voices so that together they can have one position when they go for the Conference of Parties.
It's a good thing that we've got Onward in studio. Welcome to the show.
Okay.
Onward, you deal a lot with farmers, the
Yes.
bread and basket issues, issues of the stomach. And all 54 countries have been affected or have been represented at this Climate Change Week. What are the issues that they're bringing forward in different areas, and how has climate change affected not only Zimbabwe but generally the agro-business sector within Africa?
Okay, thank you so much. Africa is known of its capacity to produce much of the food that is required, not only for the African continent, but for the entire world. So what it means with this climate change issue, there's a challenge of productivity. When I say productivity, I mean the yield that we can get per each hectare. If we talk about livestock, how many units are we producing from each piece of land? So with this issue of climate change, we're seeing 54 countries affected, particularly on the yield. Let me give an example of maize production. We are known for bread basket of Africa because we used to produce much yield per hectare because we have enough rains. But now because of climate change, we don't have enough rains. I think our rains have reduced by 30%.
30%.
30%. And it is expected to be reduced by 50% by 2050. So what it means, the yield is going to reduce each and every year, which then brings it to the issue of food insecurity, where you see a lot of people, they don't have enough food for our own consumption. While this we're supposed to discuss about exporting food to other countries because we have bigger land that can be used for production. But because there's no productivity at all because of climate change, we are solely relying on rainfall. We are solely relying on putting crops in the field, thinking that they're going to be a magic of having enough rains, but because of climate change, we don't have.
So you're saying that these are the issues that Melissa was talking about. We're going to raise these as one voice. Now, Melissa, a lot of the times when people hear about the African continent, the bias is that we're going there with the big begging bowl as African nations. We want to go and ask for money so that we can be saved. In terms of finances, are we coming together as Africa to go and beg for money, or we are thinking about coming together to find solutions to help us domestically as Zimbabweans, as Zambians individually, as Kenyans? What is the real situation in terms of finances?
Well, for finances, according to the Paris Agreement, there is this principle of the polluter must pay. What it says is those who are polluting more, they are least affected. But the ones that are polluting less, I'll take an example of Africa. They are now being affected more. So according to that, the Western countries should provide funds to African countries, but that is not the case right now. So what it means is we as Africans, instead of going to beg, we need now to come together so that we can use our own resources that we already have in Africa. I believe that we have enough resources.
Can we make the polluter pay as Africa, because we're going as a unified voice, 54 nations? Can we say you are the polluter? We've only contributed 4% to the carbon footprint. You have to pay the 96%.
We can tell them to pay, but we cannot make them to pay. That's the problem.
How?
That is already there. Because they will be telling us that, okay, we don't owe you anything. You don't need to come here and say we need to pay you for what? We didn't do anything. We were just industrializing, or we're just making our economies better. So which is something that we're supposed to do. That's what they'll be telling us as Africans. So we as Africans, or maybe our leaders, they need now to come together and make a way forward. That we as Africans, we already have the resources that we need to industrialize. We also need the technology. If we are given enough resources, policies that are stable to support our own local innovators, our own local business people, so that they can also be empowered with the information, with the knowledge, and also the technology that they need for us to industrialize as a continent.
Onward, you did speak about the agribusiness side of things, the effect of climate change. And Melissa, you told us about how all the countries are affected and what we need to do as an African continent. But as we're industrializing as a continent, as we're industrializing, getting into NDS 2, wrapping up NDS 1 as Zimbabwe, how can we industrialize while abiding by good practices and good governance policies regarding climate change and climate protection?
It's me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, we can industrialize while we are still in line with our sustainable measures. That is green growth, green world, creating green jobs. For instance, when we introduced the issue of solar systems for irrigations, we are industrialized through irrigation development, whereby we are having more than 10,000 hectares of crops irrigated using solar irrigation systems. From individual farmers, we are having also farmers with 2 hectares, 3 hectares, then government institutions as well, irrigating over 5,000 hectares using the solar powered systems. So yes, we can industrialize while we are still adhering to the principles of the climate smart agriculture through number 1, solar installation of solar systems, number 2, use of geothermal power, like what I mentioned. In Kenya they are already doing it, which can also be done in other countries. Hydropower, we're already doing it through the Kariba power station. So what it means, we can do it, and also the same power that we're talking about can be used in different industries within the country, be it in mining, be it in processing. We're having companies who are producing foodstuffs. There's to use that energy from solar, geothermal, as well as hydro to do their operations. So yes, we can industrialize while we are leaving those fossil emissions. We are living within the economy where we are having green jobs. That's low carbon economy.
And Melissa, I know one of your ultimate goals as the Climate Change Network of Zimbabwe is to have a green Zimbabwe and a green Africa. Can we industrialize using green technologies and sustainable movements?
Yes, we can. I'll talk of green jobs from the waste sector. I've seen that actually here in Zimbabwe, I'll just take a look at Zimbabwe in case. We are surrounded by waste. But if we are to change the mindset, especially of the young people, that they don't need to view that waste as trash, but as treasure. There's so much that can be done using the waste. You can also be able to produce organic fertilizers for farming, agriculture. You can also do fashion with the plastics and all that. So if we are to, first thing that we need to do is to capacitate those who are able to do that, the young people, and maybe with the women and all those people who are also important within the businesses, different business sectors, such that they are able to know what are the opportunities that are already there. So from the African continent or the African perspective, if our leaders are to make policies that are stable for us, then we can be able to do that. Why not?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And you've heard it for yourself from our two guests. Our expert who works with in the agro-business sector, Onward Marumura, has also actually spoken about the fact that, it is possible to have policies. We already have some of these practices, but they need to be amplified. And speaking to our expert from the Climate Change Network of Zimbabwe, Ms. Melissa Murwira, saying that we need to not only wait for policies to come through from governments, from continents, but as young people, we also need to see waste differently and not look at it as waste, but as renewable treasures. And that caps off the second segment of Focus 54. When we come back, we dig deeper into the Africa Climate Change Week and the Africa Climate Change Summit when we have another guest in studio. And welcome back to the third and final segment of Focus 54. We are focusing on climate change this segment and this episode, especially in terms of the Africa Climate Change Week and Africa Climate Change Summit. Earlier on, we were joined from the Climate Change Network of Zimbabwe by Miss Melissa Murwira. But this time we're joined by a different guest with the same agenda and a different insight on what we're talking about. And I'm talking about Rumbidzo Mundangefufu, who is the Communications Officer at the Emerald Climate Hub. And we want to welcome you to the show. I know I was with Onward, our agribusiness expert. Welcome to Focus 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's put this into very simple perspective. We share one planet with every country in the world. And as a continent, as Africa, we're only contributing 4% to the carbon footprint. Yet, we're facing the same climate change that everyone else is facing. As we are going into, as we're wrapping up Africa Climate Change Week and the Africa Climate Change Summit, what are we saying to the rest of the world because of this disparity in fairness and policy?
Okay. So firstly, I'd like to point out that in as much as we're all experiencing climate change, Africa has it worse. And as part of the global south, unfortunately, we do not have the resources that the rest of the world, the global north, has to be able to respond to climate issues as well as they do. So already that sets us back. And then that's why we have to have some mechanism, some plan of action as the global south, as Africa, to say, okay, this is where we are. And we do not pollute as much as the rest of the world. If anything, the developing nations are the ones who are adding more emissions to our planet. But it's quite unfortunate that for us, we have to bear the brunt of these challenges. So with the end of the climate summit, I'd say it's a step in the right direction in that at the end of it, they adopted the Nairobi Declaration, in which they'll be taking forward to the COP28, and it'll be saying, okay, this is what we're experiencing, but we're pushing back. Because we as Africa, we also are a part of the world, and we need to take measures so that we prepare our own people. We have to have solutions that will fit our own context and not just wait for the global north to come up with solutions to our own problems. But we are stating that, no, we want to be recognized on the global platform. This document will be serving as a way of holding them to account that, okay, fine, yes, climate change
Will they take it seriously, though?
Well, that is the problem, considering that there's been a fund that we were supposed to be getting since 2012? I can't remember the date.
So it's over a decade now,
it's
and
been
none of
over
that
the
has come
decade.
through.
Yeah, it's been over the decade, but unfortunately, we just have to keep pushing back.
And look, Onward, it's great that we have you in studio. You've given us the African perspective on renewable energies and types of renewable energy. Let's talk about this year. I feel as though the winter was really short and sometimes really cold. I feel like temperatures are a bit too warm for me right now. In terms of agribusiness, you deal with numbers, figures, and facts. What has climate change done to our farmers? If there are certain crops that have really been affected, what has climate change really done to Zimbabwe?
Well, we have been affected greatly in terms of productivity. Looking at the numbers, in terms of crops, like what you said, in winter we have changes in terms of how we understand our winter looks like. That's the implication of climate change. So looking at the figures, we only have cool temperatures end of July. So what it means, we are going to be affected in terms of productivity, quantity that we're going to get per single hectare. Like for example, in winter we grow crops like cabbages, broccoli, cauliflower, those cool season crops. So they are going to be affected in terms of their growing season. Then the yield is affected. Then the quality is also affected. Remember, even the export market, we are known of supplying these crops because we have these nice winters, which is 3 months, which allow us to grow those crops for 3 months, then we sell. So what it means in terms of export, we are affected as well. And also locally, we are affected. Obviously, the price will go up, and we don't have much product in the market. But not only for winter, but even for summer, we have been affected greatly in terms of rains. We received low rains last season.
And high heat.
Yes, high heat units. So what it means in terms of yield, we are affected. For example, in Zimbabwe, you know that our average yield for maize is 0.9 tons per hectare. In the Southern Africa, South Africa is much better because they get plus or minus 2.5 tons as a national average yield per hectare of maize. But in Zimbabwe, we're getting 0.9 tons. Is it sustainable for our local people to have, since maize is our staple food? So we don't have much. So in terms of food security, we are still on the
really hard hit.
Yes.
So my question now, I know Onward, you've given us the real feel of what's happening in Zimbabwe, and we'll multiply that by 54 to affect all countries in Africa. But Rumbidzo, there seems to be a shining light at the summit. Kenyan President William Ruto said that Africa can manage to depend entirely on renewable energy. Do you see that coming through, and how do we get there?
Well, it is a possibility. I'd say Africa is a treasure trove in terms of green resources. We have solar, we have wind, we have geothermal and hydropower, and of late there's been the issue of green hydrogen, and which is a very sustainable energy source. However, in as much as we have all those resources, we cannot do anything without the funding. We need to unlock climate funding. And unfortunately for developing countries, they have to fund us. The polluter must pay. We need to hold them to make them pay for the loss and damage fund, which they have been saying that they will deliver on, but not much has been done. It's just on paper, it's theoretical.
It's very theoretical. Unfortunately, just like any resource, time has been very unkind to us. And thank you to our guests who have joined us. And you've heard the big sentiment from our two guests that initially Africa can do this, and the polluter must pay. And we'll be following this and also following COP22 and COP27 later this year, and hoping that there will be some good and positive climate change. But from myself, Jeffrey Murumbechi, and the crew behind the scenes, stay tuned for more, and always keep your eye on Focus 54.